All right, everyone. So this first week, in the interest of time, since there's already some videos posted that cover a lot of the learning objectives for this first week, I'm just going to do a video or two covering the objectives that I did not get other videos for. So we are going to start out here talking about some feedback systems and homeostasis. So homeostasis is, again, our body trying to maintain that constant, steady internal state and keep things within certain parameters. So this could be hormone concentrations, this could be body temperature, and a whole slew of other things. And this is largely maintained by feedback systems, or feedback loops is another term for it. This is a cycle of events where that condition is constantly monitored. Every second of every day, it's evaluated, and then there's some sort of response to change what's going on, if necessary, to maintain that homeostasis, and then it keeps monitoring and reevaluating. So feedback systems, I like to relate them to our central heating and air systems, because you have your thermostat that is monitoring the internal temperature, comparing it to what you set that thermostat at, whatever temperature you're preferring, and then starting either the heat or the AC to bring that temperature up or down to match whatever it is that you set it at. So, feedback system has three main components. It has the receptor or sensor. This would be your thermostat if we're sticking with that analogy of our central heating and air system. So this is detecting whatever change it is. So in our body, this could be body temperature getting too high or too low. It could be blood sugar increasing or decreasing by a certain amount. It could be certain hormone levels, like what's coming out of our thyroid. That's a really important hormone to monitor constantly. So it's detecting those changes. This is called a stimulus input signal. And this is monitored in a condition, a variable, so whatever we are tracking. And it's going to send that information to a control center. In our bodies, this would be the brain. So this can be sent either via nerve impulse, so that's going to be a really, really fast response, or a chemical signal, which is generally going to be a slightly slower response. And each system that we are monitoring has its own unique setup, because not everything needs an instant, super fast signal to change. Our second component is the control or integration center. Wow, I can't talk today. So structures like our brain receive this information, process it, whatever that information supplied by the receptor is, and it's going to be setting the range of values where that should be maintained. So where should our blood sugar be? Where should our thyroid hormone levels be? And it's comparing that information from the receptor to that baseline. Again, if we go back to our central heating and air, obviously the thermostat kind of does this all in one, with the receptor and the control center kind of all together. So it's not a perfect analogy, but I think it works pretty well. So it's still comparing it to whatever that standard baseline range is. And then it's going to determine what response it needs to do based on that information. Does it need to increase or decrease the temperature? Does it need to increase or decrease blood glucose levels or anything like that? And then it sends out that information through, again, either a nerve impulse or chemical signal, depending on the system. Sometimes we want very, very fast responses, and sometimes we don't. And then our third component of these feedback loops is the effector. So this is whatever cell or organ is getting that output. It is whatever's getting that nerve impulse or chemical signal and actually produces that response to change the condition, raising blood sugar, lowering body temperature if you're running a fever or anything like that. And there are a couple different types of feedback loops. And so we can change the conditions either by depressing it, so preventing more of a change. This is negative feedback, or it can actually enhance it. This is positive feedback. Most of the systems in our body are negative feedback loops, but there are some really important ones that function within the positive feedback loop. So, for example, if you're really, really cold, the skeletal muscles, these would be the effectors, could cause you to shiver in response to cold conditions, so that would be the stimulus. So, as I mentioned already, feedback systems can be either negative or positive feedback systems or feedback loops. So, again, these are all going to have essentially the same components for that maintenance of homeostasis. We have to have that receptor, we have a control center, and we have an effector. And we constantly have to be monitoring this all the time for both types of systems. So negative feedback, again, this is the most common for our body. So this is where the body senses an internal change and activates whatever response that is going to reverse that change and prevent it from changing more. So that's why it's called negative. So it's having a negative effect on whatever that change is. So it reverses the direction. So blood sugar levels, for example, if high blood glucose levels are detected, then the insulin secreting cells of the pancreas are stimulated to release insulin into the blood. Insulin is going to trigger the body cells to take up more glucose, and the liver is also going to take up glucose to store it as glycogen, which is our carbohydrate storage system. And then that is going to cause blood sugar levels to go down to whatever they're supposed to be at, because we do need to have a standard baseline. We do not want too much or too little sugar in our blood. And then if the blood sugar levels start going down too much, then that is also detected by the pancreas, and the glucagon releasing cells of the pancreas tell the liver, hey, that glycogen that you made earlier to store this excess glucose, you need to go ahead and release that glucose into the bloodstream now because we need it. And then blood glucose levels will go back up, and that is going to signal back to the pancreas and therefore liver that blood sugar levels are fine now, you can stop. You do not need to keep releasing glycogen. Our body temperature and blood pressure are also maintained in a similar fashion among many other systems. So, negative feedback process endpoint. This ends when that condition is back within its normal range. But it's also still constantly being monitored, especially things that could constantly be changing, like our blood sugar levels. So negative feedback process starts when whatever that variable, blood sugar, body temperature, leaves the range that it's supposed to be at to maintain our homeostasis, and then it is going to end or terminate when that returns back to that baseline range. So they are self-terminating. There's no external factor that really has to come in and turn them off. So one thing other than blood glucose is blood pressure, like I mentioned. So I want to talk a bit more about orthostatic hypotension. So blood pressure to the head is going to decrease when somebody goes from lying down to standing up. This can also happen to a lesser extent if you go from sitting to standing. Because you're still changing position slightly, it's usually not as much of an effect. So when you stand up, gravity is going to pull your blood downward towards your legs. And generally speaking, your body is going to be able to counteract that without you even noticing that anything really has changed. But there is a condition called orthostatic hypotension, also sometimes called postural hypotension. This is a type of low blood pressure that comes when you stand up from sitting or lying down, and you are not really able to compensate for that properly. So we have a lot of receptors in our body called baroreceptors. These are a type of sensor that detect changes in our blood pressure. They're very, very, very specialized neurons in the walls of the aortic arch, so coming directly out of the heart, and the carotid sinuses. So those are going to be kind of up in our neck. And these measure how much stretch is going to that blood vessel wall. And that is detecting blood pressure. Blood pressure is how much pressure is being put on the blood vessels. So information from those baroreceptors gets sent to the brain, to the medulla oblongata specifically, via sensory nerves. So this is a fast response, because not having blood in our brain is not a good thing. So we need to counteract that decrease in blood flow to the brain when we stand up very, very quickly. So if our blood pressure goes too high or too low, there is going to be a change in cardiac output from the heart that is going to help correct it. So if blood pressure goes too low, our body's going to try to increase blood pressure to correct that and make sure that we are still getting enough blood flow to the brain. And if it's too high, it is going to try to decrease that. And obviously there's a lot of health conditions that can come with high blood pressure, especially chronically. Temporarily high blood pressure is not necessarily a bad thing, but if it's a chronic, constant thing, then that leads to a lot of other issues. So the medulla oblongata gets these signals and analyzes the change in blood pressure, sends a nerve impulse to the heart and blood vessels, mainly the arterioles, so those smaller arteries, and these are both effectors, and we're going to try to correct that decrease in blood pressure. So heart rate, how fast our heart is beating, and how much blood is being pumped out are increased to increase blood pressure. Those arterioles are also going to constrict, that vasoconstriction, to help further increase blood pressure, because now we have a smaller tube and the fluid flowing through it is going to put more pressure on those walls. So again, if blood pressure is too high or too low, that change in cardiac output is initiated. So this is negative feedback. We want our blood pressure to stay within a certain range to make sure all of our organs are getting appropriate amounts of blood flow. And we don't want it going above or below that. So this is our negative feedback system. So the response, increasing blood pressure, reverses the direction of that initial change. So our blood pressure decreases, we reverse it by increasing blood pressure a little bit, at least temporarily, until the body is ready to maintain that same blood pressure at homeostasis when we are standing up. There is a condition called vasovagal syncope, also sometimes called cardioneurogenic syncope. This is passing out due to specific causes. So this is a very common type of syncope that occurs when the blood pressure drops suddenly, which reduces blood flow to the brain. And when you stand up, gravity causes the blood to settle back down in the lower parts of your body, below the diaphragm, and your heart and autonomic nervous system are going to react to maintain your blood pressure. So a lot of patients who have orthostatic hypotension are going to suffer from vasovagal syncope, where they stand up and blood pressure drops really, really quickly, and they can actually lose consciousness very briefly as a result of this. So this is just a zoomed in view of that image. So again, another look at syncope. So this is a brief loss of consciousness. Fainting, passing out are alternative terms for that, more commonly used outside of the medical field. This is caused by a temporary decrease in blood flow to the brain. So there are a lot of different causes of syncope, but vasovagal syncope, vaso means blood vessels, and vagal refers to the vagus nerve, which comes from the brainstem and actually innervates a significant amount of our organs. It is going to connect with the vast majority of the organs in our body and help control some of our automatic responses within the nervous system. This is the most common type of syncope. So this can happen in cases of emotional stress, a lot of trauma, severe pain. Some people have this response seeing blood, sometimes prolonged standing. So if you're standing for too long or straining, even having a bowel movement, that does happen sometimes because there's too much pressure being put that is causing blood flow to not get to the brain. So the nervous system here can malfunction, causing the heart rate to slow down, the blood vessels vasodilate, which decreases blood pressure, which results in less blood flow to the brain, and then you faint. A little graphic down here, these are fainting goats. They're not actually fainting, it's a muscle condition. So a little bit different graphic here. So a lot of these blood pressure regulation things are very fast, but very short-term adjustments. So if arterial blood pressure decreases, that's detected by the aortic arch and carotid sinus baroreceptors. That increases our sympathetic nervous system activity, which is going to lead to arterial vasoconstriction. So getting those vessels to be a little smaller. That increases resistance on them, which increases pressure. So that blood pressure goes up. That also increases cardiac output, that sympathetic nervous system, which increases the blood pressure. And we don't want that staying around for too terribly long, but we do need to make sure that we get everything equalized and working against gravity. So we've seen this graphic a couple times already, so I'm not going to take too much time to go over this. And the next thing we're going to talk about is the hypothalamus and thermoregulation. And we are actually going to do that in the next video because I prefer to do shorter videos. So this is almost 20 minutes long now, so I'm just going to cut this video here and cover this in our next one.